When you're really, really into someone, but you can't tell them how you feel because on some level, you know they don't feel the same way, you might be tempted to be their friend and keep pretending you're this incredibly nice person and you're there for them always, but secretly you're hoping that they'll come around and realize someday that you're the one and they'll reciprocate your feelings. So this is a form of limerence, pretending you're a friend to manipulate them into staying in your life. So the fantasy of being with them can keep providing you with fuel to keep going in your life. What the fantasy does for you is it keeps you from having to face reality, that you're alone actually, that this person isn't into you, or they'd have shown you that by now. And that the only way you're going to find love is by letting go of the fantasy and opening up your life to something new. Now, it's obvious when I say it, right? But if you've ever been limerent on someone, and that's the obsession or infatuation with someone you can't have that tends to overpower your life like an addiction to a fantasy of having that love reciprocated. Well, if that's happened to you, you've probably experienced how hard it is to let the fantasy die. It seems like the only good thing in your world, but because limerence will suck the life out of you, the pain of continuing the fantasy just becomes too much. Like if that's the best thing you've got, that is a wake-up call that you need more joy and more love in your life. Today I'm sharing a video from my archive where I answer a letter from a man who is in this very situation, and here's the video. If a real relationship is what you want, then it's time to get real about what you really want, what the person you're interested in really has to offer, and what in your own self needs to be healed so that you can stop making the same relationship mistakes over and over again. Real relationships involve pain and loss sometimes. You can get rejected. You could be deceived. You could end up settling for less than you really want. You could end up in a bad situation and feel stuck there. Now, these are real stakes, and they can easily come into play when you dodge some of the responsibility and courage required to show up, be vulnerable, and let another person get to know you enough to maybe fall in love with you. Now, none of that can happen when you hide how you feel, remaining separate, apart from the person you're in love with, and pouring all that emotional energy into a fantasy version of how things could be with them. I'm not just talking about imagining a romance with someone who's not in a relationship with you. I'm talking about the kind of one-sided romance where the intensity of your feelings and your vision of the potential of the relationship is just going up like here, and you're so tuned into every sign they give you that they might feel the same way, but your communication and openness about the nature of your feelings is way down here. You're hiding what a big deal they are to you, or hiding the fact that you're interested romantically, or you're pretending to be just friends. Not only do healthy people not find this kind of hiding attractive, but it can absolutely hollow out your actual life. You end up alone. All that energy is going basically into like nothing, into air. That's what a fantasy is. A place in your mind that you keep locked up so you don't have to face what's real. Nothing can be built in a fantasy relationship. Nothing can deepen, and no one is there for you at the end of the day, which is the very thing that made you afraid to face what's real in the first place. Fear that you would end up being rejected, so you end up sacrificing the possibility of being with anyone. If real love is what you want, it's important to own that, to spot fantasy energy when it's happening and shine the light of day on it, to come back to your real self and do good things there to make real love possible. All right, I got a letter the other day from someone I'll call Jim, and he writes, "Hi Anna, I grew up very emotionally neglected by both parents. I grew up in a two-parent home, middle class, and never lacked for any physical needs. However, my emotional needs as a child were never met or cared for. I have memories that go back to age 3, but I have not a single memory of either my mother or father telling me they loved me or even giving me a hug." This becomes significant. Okay. "I was also the oldest of 4 and was often in a situation where I was babysitting or taking care of my 3 younger siblings. My father worked 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, so was absent a lot. I also became the emotional parent with my mother as I took on the role of regulating my mother's emotions rather than her helping me with mine.
I hid my emotions and needs, and my primary goal each day was, don't stress out, Mom. I was always on guard, hiding my own emotions and managing things so she would not get upset. It is only within the past year that I've realized a lot of this. I've learned how my childhood has affected my adult life in many ways, including my relationships. I'm 41 years old, divorced, single, with 2 kids. There were different issues in my marriage, but I can recognize now how I was not emotionally available throughout. See, I circled because I'm going to come back and read it again, and we'll talk about what you said here, Jim. I had a 4-year relationship after my divorce, but that also ended up not working out. I have a full-time job running a group home for teenagers and a part-time job as staff at a youth center. I also volunteer at 2 other youth group programs. I have 2 kids of my own, ages 11 and 9, and I always have at least one of them with me, so I'm a full-time single dad, not to mention managing my own house. I love my jobs, what I do, and I love my kids and the time I get with them, but my time is pretty filled up, and I don't have much room for a relationship on top of everything else. I get pretty lonely at times being single. I desperately want a relationship and someone to spend my life with. I've been single now for 2.5 years. On to my current issues with limerence. Over the summer, my youth center did our week-long summer camp for teens. I do it every year and love it. Some adult leaders from the other youth group programs were there to help. One of them being a beautiful young woman who I met there on the first day. Throughout the week, we spent a good bit of time around each other during the various activities. We also had some good interactions and conversations, talking and laughing. I felt like we connected in some ways throughout the week. A week like that is a bonding experience anyway among the staff team due to the shared mission of our experience. But I found myself really liking her and putting in effort to be in situations with her. She displays all the qualities I would look for in a woman and was also there involved in something that I find important and love doing. It made sense that I would be attracted to her and would like her. She is younger, 28 years old, never married, no kids, which all immediately made me pause and figure she would never go for someone like me. It's not like I'm out searching for younger women. I just happened to meet her, and she has all these wonderful qualities that I'm attracted to. I also don't meet women much in my regular routine. Running a group home with all-male staff and working with teenagers doesn't lead to many opportunities to meet available women. After the week of camp ended, I could not stop thinking about her. I desperately missed being around her. I connected with her on social media and sent her a message, just a hey, it was great to have you there, and it was great to meet you kind of message to get a conversation going. We sent a couple of messages back and forth casually, and then she stopped responding and never even read my final message. I knew I couldn't bombard her with more messages, so I left it at that. I felt crushed that she stopped responding and that she obviously did not want to communicate with me as much as I did her. I wanted to keep a connection going, and it hurt a lot to come to a realization that she did not feel the same. If she had, she would have kept talking. I continued to keep thinking and obsessing about her, crying at times because I did not have the connection with her that I wanted. She just seems like the perfect person for me. I started volunteering at the same youth group location where she volunteers. I got to be around her a bit there, but sometimes would find myself getting nervous, worried about what to say, then leaving and not even talking to her. Those times would lead me to feeling completely crushed that night. However, on a couple occasions, I did talk to her, and we would have a good conversation catching up with each other. Those times would lead to a huge high feeling of hope and happiness. After a couple of months of just hoping to be around her and maybe connect more through conversation, I was scrolling through social media and saw a post of her in a relationship, a seemingly brand new one. It just emotionally devastated me. Then only a month later, scrolling through again, I see a post of her getting engaged, the actual video of it happening. I was completely crushed again. She must have been dating him for a while and no one in my circle realized. I had already known she wasn't interested in me because of the lack of response or reaching out to me past the short conversations we would sometimes have, but I still had hope in my head. To see her engagement was very hard. It's still fresh and I'm thinking about her a lot. She's amazing and has all the qualities I think I want. From what I've learned about limerence, says Jim, it seems like this is what has been going on with me. This is not the first time I've gotten this way over a woman I was interested in. What I'm wondering is this really limerence, or is this normal feelings? Are these normal feelings from meeting someone you're attracted to, someone you're interested in? How do I know the difference? I don't want to shut down my feelings, but I also don't want to have unhealthy obsessions or get too caught up and hurt more. How do I control it? It's so difficult to pull myself out of those low times, the sadness and the depression and the loneliness. I want to feel falling in love with someone. I want to feel all the good feelings that come with that, but I also don't want to keep feeling what I'm feeling right now. I'm also worried that I didn't even know what a good and healthy loving relationship feels like. I want to love and be loved and haven't had that in my life. I also worry at times that maybe I focus too much on the obsessions and may miss something else good. The situation has really caused me a lot of heartache over the last several months. All right, from Jim. Oh, Jim, that's a hard spot to be in. I think a lot of people here can relate. I know I can. And I'm going to go through your letter now again and highlight what I learned about you and what I can suggest to you based on what you wrote, okay? So you grew up emotionally neglected by both parents. And what you're going through now really matches that, okay? You grew up in a two-parent home, middle class, never lacked for any physical needs. Just goes to show that's not everything. However, your emotional needs were never met or cared for. You said, I have memories that go back to age 3, but I have not a single memory of either of my mother or father telling me they loved me or giving me a hug. All right, that right there's a reference for us. That kind of matches what you're describing about your adult relationships. So there we can zero in on what you're missing. What you may be missing is just that baseline foundation of knowing what that feeling is so that you can recognize it and not settle for less, all right? So let's go through. I was also the oldest of 4, was often in a situation where you were babysitting or taking care of younger siblings. Interesting that you did that, and now you work in youth homes. I think your work is noble and real and everything, but it's just interesting, the caretaker of young people. Your dad worked 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, so was absent a lot. And I thought that was interesting because it sounds like you're never home, and we're going to get there. You had to become the emotional parent with your mother and take on the role of regulating her emotions rather than her helping me with mine. So I'm thinking in group homes, that's where that skill is coming in handy. So, interesting resonance between then and now. And not easy, like just knowing how to take care of somebody rather than be loved. I hid my emotions and needs, and my primary goal each day was don't stress out, Mom. So I hid my emotions and needs, and there it is. There it is. Let's just shine a big bright light on that. I hid my emotions and needs, because that's what I think is going on right now. You were always on guard. You were hiding emotions, managing things so she would not get upset. And it's only within the past year or so that you've realized a lot of this. Yay! Realizing it is half the battle, and here you are working on it, so good for you. You're 41, you're divorced, single with 2 kids. They're 11 and 9. What a precious age that is. Very formative for them, the relationship that you have with them. And you recognize that in your marriage, which is over, you see that you were not emotionally available. So I'm not sure, you don't really go into that, but you were not emotionally available. So being emotionally available is a super important thing for a relationship. This is your call to action now, that your job now is to start to learn to be emotionally available. And I'll tell you a couple things you can do to get started on that as we go through this, okay? But emotional availability is so important. So it's good you recognize that you hadn't done that. Then you had a 4-year relationship after your divorce, but that didn't work out. You didn't really comment on why, but I'm going to guess that it had to do with you hiding emotions and needs and not being emotionally available. So you have a full-time job running a group home for teenagers and a part-time job as staff at a youth center. Okay, so that's 1.5 jobs. You also volunteer at 2 other youth group programs, and you have 2 kids, 11 and 9, and one of them is always with you, so you're a full-time dad. Okay, so Jim, I'm calling you out. If you're doing a full-time job, a part-time job, and 2 volunteer jobs, when are you with your kids? When are you emotionally available to them? I really seldom really get in people's faces with stuff, but I just want to say The volunteer jobs, I'm not hearing why they're important. I get that this woman that you were into worked at one, and we'll talk about that. But just for the sake of the kids, I think having been a single parent for 9 years of my mom years, I split from their dad when they were 1 and 4, not by choice, but it was for the best, and then remarried more recently, so there were 9 years I was not married. So I know how hard it is. And I know that a person who's being a single parent needs time when they're with adults, needs time when they're like, enriching their lives. Of course, everybody needs that. And you may need to go on dates and all that. So you need some time that's not in the full-time job. And I'm assuming, you haven't said otherwise, that you're splitting custody with their mom. So there's nights when she has them, but for some reason you have this arrangement where one of them is always with you. So that's interesting. I don't know why that is. Maybe that's necessity. But if they could be together, then you would have nights free for volunteering. But otherwise, kids are always at home without you. So that kind of, to me, I'm like, whoa, what's going on with all that? Where are you? Emotional availability to your kids is the most important kind of emotional availability you can do right now. And I think you'll be surprised how rich your life gets when you have those more connection with your kids, which can only be gained through time with your kids. And that the pressure to find romance, it's real, and I totally hope you find that for yourself. But once you're a parent, that has to go at a certain slower pace, and it needs to be kept farther away from home, because that relationship with the kids is sacrosanct. It has to be protected. So that's what I just want to say, is that quality time with your kids. I hate that word quality time. That's like what busy people do to pretend they're there. Really, really being close to your kids is going to be a powerful antidote to the loneliness you feel. And yeah, it's not the same as a partner, but it's more important than a partner right now. And when you do meet a good person who is partner material, you having a good relationship with your kids is going to be an absolute good thing for all 4 of you, the kids, you, and this new partner. Having a peaceful life, having loving relationships in the right order, that's top line order is kids first. Having that in order is going to first signal to a healthy woman one day that you're a good guy. That's what a good guy does. And I just know, being too busy all the time, it's a strategy to avoid pain and to avoid loneliness. And anything that we do to avoid, it's basically, it's kind of the same thing as doing a drug or something. We don't develop during that time. The time that you're caring for kids or all by yourself is time when you can bring into your awareness those parts of yourself that still need healing, rather than running from it all the time. That's how we can stay stuck in a developmental delay. And I use the word developmental delay for what childhood PTSD can do to us. And healing means the delay ends and we start developing. We move forward in life. So I encourage you to have more time alone and less time working. I'm sure money is an issue. This isn't high-paid work you're talking about, but the volunteering doesn't pay anything. So there you have that. So you say, yeah, your time is pretty filled up and you don't have much room for a relationship on top of everything else. This is true. And you get pretty lonely. It's been 2.5 years, and I know that's hard. And I remember being in the same boat, and it felt so important to meet somebody. Looking back, though, with my retrospecto goggles, that the time with the kids is the most memorable time. The dates I went on, or worrying about relationships, is totally water under the bridge. When I did get enough healing done that a really good relationship could fall into place, first of all, he didn't even meet the kids for a year. They didn't meet him, because I didn't want to bring relationship problems or somebody who was going to come and go out of their life into their life one more time. And so that's another thing I would recommend to you, is that when you do date, and we're going to get to this situation at hand, but I just want to say, when you do date, take it real slow. Okay. I'm going to talk about reality, the reality of dating as a single parent, because that's what this video is about getting real with yourself and what you really need. All right, so over the summer, your youth center did a week-long summer camp for teens. You do it every year. You love it. It sounds like incredible fun. Some adult leaders from other youth group programs were there to help, and one of them was this beautiful young woman. And you talked to her, you got to know her, you laughed. There was a meaningful connection because you both are on this, common mission to serve teenagers and make life better for them, which is great. And a week like that is a bonding experience. I get it. I get why you would really be able to connect closely with somebody in that situation. So that's all good. And then you say she displays all the qualities that I would look for in a woman, all except one. So it made sense to be attracted. She's 28, you're 41. That's not a deal-breaking age difference. It's definitely notable, and you know that. And you being a single dad, and she's never married. It's, she's at an age where there's a high probability she would want more kids. So there may be, there's a lot of stuff that would be worked out through getting to know you with somebody if you were to date them, but it didn't ever progress to dating. So you thought she would never go for it. It's not what you were looking for was a younger woman, but it just happened, and these things happen, and that's okay, and that's beautiful. Okay. After camp ended, you couldn't stop thinking about her, you desperately missed her, and you wrote to her on social media, okay? And you said, hey, it was just great to meet you, kind of message to get the conversation going. There were a couple messages, and then she stopped responding, and she never even read the final message. And that's kind of cryptic. I'm curious about what that was, but I knew I couldn't bombard her with more messages. Good call. That's true. There was no reciprocation. So you left it at that, but you felt crushed that she stopped responding and that she obviously didn't want to communicate as much. And you wanted to keep the connection going, and it hurt a lot to come to the realization that she didn't feel the same. And if she had, she would have kept talking. Right on. Good. You're reading the signals correctly. You did something right here. You got it resolved fairly quickly. You did it passively, not by actually talking to her about how you felt. But at least it was only a couple of messages. But I think there was a lack of completion here and this devastation that you feel. So you say you continue to think about and obsessing on her. So yeah, obsessing happens when there's no sunshine on it, when you're staying in a non-real fantasy version of the relationship rather than the real one. The real one is painful because she didn't even return your messages. And so this is where we kind of split off, and part of us just continues to have a relationship with the idea of somebody, and that's very comforting to us, and it's this escape. And actually, as a former single parent, I totally understand the desire to escape. I don't think you're a bad person, but I'm just here to kind of help shake you out of this now so that you can get on with having a real relationship, all right? And you keep saying she just seems like the perfect person for you, and you put that in present tense. I'll tell you why she's not the perfect person for you, not even close, is she has a boyfriend, all right? Your perfect person is single, available, and in love with you. That's your perfect person. And anybody who doesn't meet those criteria is a terrible person for you. They're just not good at all right? So first, I'm just going to come in here and say the elephant in the room. She's not the perfect person for you. She's a terrible person for you. It's totally because of something you know about her, right? So then you say, after finding this out, you started volunteering at the same youth group location where she volunteers. That's why I was going on and on about the kids, all right? Second volunteer gig. I just do not feel from what you've told me you have time for this. And she's already she's not interested in you. So this is where I kind of saw the CPTSD behavior of yours. Everything else, I'm like, no, I get it. But where you volunteer with somebody who rejected you is where your CPTSD got control of the steering wheel of your life. All right, and you get to be around her there, and then you get to talk to her, and you're nervous, and sometimes she talks, and sometimes not, and good conversation, and then you'd get a high if she did talk to you. All right, so that's you in limerence. That's you doing the drug of limerence, of going and wasting your precious time at another volunteer gig, like you have full-time job, part-time job, volunteer gig, now another volunteer gig to be around someone who rejected you. I'm just driving it home here. This is not a good idea, and she's not the perfect person. So a really good thing happened, in my opinion, and it's that you were looking at her stuff on social media, and you saw she's in a relationship, and it devastated you, but that was a good thing to happen. Like, it burst your bubble. You having your heart broken by realizing she's in a relationship was you coming to Earth. Earth is a good place to be for you. Okay? Earth is where all real love is and where the women are who might fall in love with you. Fantasy is where nothing is. You can keep like putting your thoughts on it, but it never gives you anything back, all right? So that's why I say, I'm glad you had that painful experience of that, and then further you saw that she got engaged, and you learned this had been going on the whole time. So what you have an opportunity to do here is think back about the interactions you had and how you were thinking, searching for signs that she was maybe into you, which is what limerence is. You just like, maybe here, maybe that cryptic thing she said was really meant to say this. But where she was coming from was she had a boyfriend who was about to propose. She was probably thinking about that, excited about it, in love with him. And you were some guy that she worked with, and you were nice enough, and she talked to you, and then when she stopped responding to your messages means it started to feel weird. It's not just that she wasn't interested in it, but like she stopped being polite to you. And then she gave you another chance to be polite, because what I'm guessing, Jim, is that you put on an act and pretended to be her friend. I'm just your friend. I'm like a guy at work. And this is what we do. This is what we do that makes us end up alone, and I want you to stop doing it. Do not pretend to be someone's friend. If somebody says, like, look, I'm not interested, then back off of them. And if you possibly can, stop having contact with them. And with her, in this case, you can. This is a volunteer gig that you're kind of stalking her a little bit there. So you can back this off and not have contact with her. This is what I want to say to you. You had to hide your needs and feelings so much that some weird kind of shame comes up in you when you have a crush on somebody. And a 41-year-old man having a crush on a woman is not a bad thing. Now, when you're at work, you might have to be subtle and cool about it, but once the work thing is over, the right thing to do if you want a relationship with them is to express it to them. Ask them out on a date. Just say, I don't know, I wasn't sure how you might feel about this, but getting to know you has been really nice, and I wanted to see if you want to get together sometime. That's what you do. That's how you honestly show up with your feelings of being interested to somebody. Now, if you had done this, she would have said, oh, I'm sorry, I don't feel that way at all. I have a boyfriend. It's a serious relationship. And you would have had that disappointing experience like nice and quick. And that's what we're all avoiding, right? When we pretend to be people's friends when we're madly in love with them. That's what we're trying to avoid, is that inevitable, like it's going to be cut off if we are honest about how we feel. Because usually we know on some level the feeling isn't returned. And it's only through that, putting all that energy into the fantasy that we can kind of keep it going. But even if we have no idea how they feel, or we honestly believe they're interested, sunshine is a very good thing. And if someone's interested in you, they will welcome the news that you're interested. And if they're not interested, very important, again, like if you're in a work situation, like at the summer camp, that could be harassment. But once the whole thing is over, you can come out and be honest. And that is you being your full self. You're a grown man, and you get to have feelings, and you get to ask people out and express yourself. And the growth part for you is to start to have the experience of gracefully handling it when somebody says no. And we all have to learn how to do that. And I bet you've done it in all kinds of situations for work and, things that you've tried to do, wanted to get involved with, and probably dating. The fantasy can only be protected by avoiding that moment where you come out and show people how you really feel. And the fantasy starts to build up, so the stakes become so high against that rejection that's coming that you start to, put this false self out there. And I'm telling you, there is nothing less attractive than somebody going, oh yeah, I'm your buddy. And you feel that vibe from them. Like that's what creepy means, is somebody not being straightforward about how they feel. I guess there's ways of being creepy, creepy people who actually like stalk and pursue. That's creepy. But that dishonesty where you're vibing somebody at being into them and then you're pretending to be their buddy, like it's not trustworthy. And I want you, Jim, to have like a totally like straightforward, open-hearted, honest woman who becomes interested in you at the same time, or you ask her out, or maybe she suggests something, but let's say she hasn't realized she likes you yet, and you ask her, and she goes, oh, I don't know, and then you go, that's cool, well, maybe another time. You gracefully let people have a choice about whether to date you or not, and then we go home and we learn to deal with it. And that's why I spend so much time teaching my daily practice techniques, because those are the techniques that I use every day to deal with all the disappointments, all the embarrassment, all the rejections. You know, there's just little things all day long that trigger us, you know, that trigger hurt feelings or shame or old PTSD stuff. And we need a way to just keep kind of like processing it out, so we can be at peace at the end of the day. It's like, well, I tried. Well, I asked the person. I let them know how I feel. Okay, they weren't interested. Moving on. And that's how you move on. That's how you keep yourself emotionally available, not tied up in a fantasy, not with all your emotions completely unavailable to any real world woman who's looking for a relationship with a guy like you. So that's what it is. It's honesty, transparency, and appropriateness. And that's what I could see in you, that you got trained by your parents' situation to be ashamed of all your feelings and needs, that there's something wrong with it. And you have to pretend to be like Mr. Helpful. I just help people. I'm just so nice. I mentioned this in a video recently, but I read a really good book for men called No More Mr. Nice Guy. And it's a lot about that sort of codependent way of relating to women, of trying to be so nice to get their approval, and how it's not attractive and it never works. And I think you might love it. It's by Robert Glover. I'll put a link down below in the description section for anybody who wants that. I don't know him. I have actually sent an email inviting him, like, come on, Crappy Childhood Fairy. I talk about your book all the time. Maybe someday. If anybody knows him, tell him he should come on Crappy Childhood Fairy. But it's a good book. All right. So then you said, from what you've learned about limerence, it seems like that's what's going on. Yes, I agree. This is not the first time you've gotten this way over a woman, and you were wondering, is it or is it normal? It's like, well, I think we all get a little gaga over people that we are in love with, and we all get a little embarrassed to admit it sometimes. So it's mostly normal. The part where you're holding on to it so long, that's the part that's limerence. And I don't want you to spend another day holding on to a relationship that you already know can't be. That's another day you can't be emotionally available and like out there meeting somebody great, all right? And it's another day that your emotional presence is missing from home with those kids of yours. And oh, you have an opportunity to give them that foundation of a loving and present dad who's really there for them and isn't just kind of spaced out and always kind of thinking of something that's not in the room. Right here in the room, helping with homework, disciplining, loving them, supporting them, showing up at their activities, helping them be on time, helping them discern good behavior, good decisions. This is your top priority, okay? So anything that takes you out of that is automatically like not good for you. What's good for the kids is good for you. All right. And with less volunteering and more focus on the kids and developing your emotional availability to them, I think you're going to have a different result next time you get a crush on somebody. And another opportunity will come. You're at a great age for this. You sound so, self-aware, and you make an effort, and you're a catch, and you can have this. But you got to get these like limerent stuff out of the way. It's just, it's like puncturing your own tires every day. It's not a good thing to do. So you don't want to shut down your feelings, but you got to shut down your feelings for this woman, and you can. So you say, I want to feel falling in love with someone. I want to feel all the good things that come with that. I want you to have that too. And I don't want you to have, just like you said, the part where you just find out like that they were like with somebody else the whole time. Only a CPTSD kid can go on that long not realizing that they're not getting something back. So that's what you can train yourself to do. I have a dating course. You might want to check it out. I'll put a link to it down below, and also a quiz that shows you common symptoms that childhood trauma might be affecting your dating life. But I teach very directly how you can detect an available versus an unavailable person and start to really identify like what's your pattern. Where is it that you sort of like a switch flips and you can't see it? Where does that happen, and how can you actually keep yourself like really grounded and seeing clearly what's going on? And I have distinct exercises for that. So you might want to check that out. I really encourage you, Jim, don't do this alone. It's so important to have people who care about you and know you and you're talking honestly with them. And maybe you have that, you didn't mention this here, but like man friends would be very good for you to have, or maybe a 12-step fellowship of some kind with the men. It's, if you're somebody prone to limerence, it's really easy to kind of bring it with you everywhere you go. So for anybody listening, if you're thinking about going to a 12-step program to deal with limerence, maybe Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous or one of the other programs you qualify for, I would just really exhort you to get some boundaries around any kind of pursuit of romance in those programs. It's not a good place to do it, generally speaking. It can happen, but leave it. Like, just say for at least 1 year, all I'm going to do is get a sponsor and work this program, and I am not going to date here. And I've been around 12-step programs, and I'll just say, just many a person just goes down over that kind of thing. It always feels like if love came along, it would fix us. And it's true that what we need is love, but romantic love is kind of at the top of the pyramid. And we start with the other kinds of treating ourselves with love, treating our kids with love, treating our friends with love, treating the people in our lives who care about us with love, and developing those relationships, and then learning about the wound from our childhood trauma and learning to overcome it. I have this thing, the daily practice. Check that out. I just have all kinds of tools for people. That's what I do, is I help people have a way to calm their symptoms and be able to make good choices for themselves. It's so important, all right? That's how you're going to get love. And yeah, you've had a lot of heartache, and it's going to get better, Jim.
The way you were taught that the right way to find your future spouse is dooming your chances from the start. You were told that what healthy people do is just see who you meet. If you like someone and they like you, start hanging out. And if there's mutual attraction, then the next level would be to start having sex. But for as long as possible, you must avoid any talk of defining the relationship, because in our culture, trying to get clarification about someone's level of interest, what their intentions are for the relationship, it's seen as outdated, controlling, and clingy. If you bring it up, and I'm talking to women here, you might get dumped. So if you're into this person that you've been sleeping with, you go along feeling one way, in love, hopeful, terrified of rejection, but acting another way. It's cool. I'm the cool girl. Whatever. See you when I see you. And then hope to God they decide they're into you. And this whole fragmented courtship idea seems to work for other people, but if you have attachment wounds from growing up with neglectful parents, if you were never loved properly, then playing this cool girl game would be like this terrible prison you put yourself into. You think the other person is requiring it, but actually you did this to yourself when the whole thing started. And all your emotional energy is pouring into a relationship that may have been doomed before it even began. Okay? My letter today is from a woman I'll call Bridget, and she writes, "Dear Fairy, I'm a product of an unstable home. Both of my parents came from volatile, violent, and abusing families, and this impacted them." Okay, I've got my fairy pencil. I'm going to circle things that I want to come back to on a second reading, but let's read through Bridget's letter all the way through and see what's going on. All right. She says, "My father is an alcoholic and a narcissist, and my mother was depressive and codependent. I grew up with a lot of instability, aggression, and pain. Despite this, I managed to forge a life for myself that I can be proud of. Of course, everything is far from perfect, and I still have a lot to achieve, but at 33, I managed to have a career as a freelancer in a very niche market that brings me a lot of joy and fulfillment, and I moved to another continent where I'm building a stable and secure life. However, in my love life, it seems all the dysfunctionality keeps resurfacing." I know how that is. "And it's horrifying to me that I can't seem to undo old patterns and find love. I've been through a myriad of horrible relationships, abuse, and heartache, and this has only added to my abandonment issues. My last relationship, which is the one that has me writing to you today, was in a lot of ways very different than previous ones. I met this man who was always very kind to me, and we initiated a courtship that was very casual at first. However, with time, I started developing deeper feelings for him, and it came to a point where I had to confront him about where the relationship was going. And this resulted in us breaking up because he had recently left another long-term relationship and was not ready for commitment. just yet. He was honest and respectful during the breakup, but it still left me devastated. At the time when I confronted him, I truly believed when I told him if he couldn't give me what I need, that he needed to set me free so I could find someone who would meet my needs. I'm also well aware that even though we got along greatly and he has a lot of good qualities, there are a lot of things that make us a less than perfect match. We don't share a lot of the same values, and we don't have the same vision for our lives. For example, he really wants kids, while I'm sure that I don't want to become a mother. So all of this should be enough for me to know that this was a relationship that had great things but didn't work out, and I should move on from it. But this is not what happened. I'm still stuck in this pain, and I can't let go of the feelings of rejection and abandonment. I've been in a downward spiral ever since our breakup and fallen into old self-destructive behaviors. It's awful because it feels like I've learned nothing, that I haven't healed one bit, and I'm always going to be stuck in this cycle every time I fall for someone. It also doesn't help that friends don't seem to understand why this situation has hurt me so much, which has made me feel even more isolated and alone. I would really like your help in this situation. How can I separate the rejection of today from the rejection of the past and find confidence that I have made the right decision in confronting him and not getting swallowed by the despair of being alone again once again? Your guidance would be much appreciated. From Bridget. Okay, Bridget, I got you. Let's go through again. I'm going to come back to things I circled and talk about what you told me about this situation. All right. I noticed you used the word unstable 3 times. Unstable. That's interesting. Like, that's not an uncommon feature for a traumatic home for a kid, but just that you used it 3 times. I just feel like stability is something you really need, and you're very aware that you haven't had it. And so both your parents came from these terrible childhoods, and your father is an alcoholic and a narcissist. Your mother was depressive and codependent. It sounds like maybe she's passed away. And you grew up with a lot of instability, aggression, and pain. That's horrible. Bridget, that's horrible. That's not right. That would create problems in relationships for anyone. But you managed to forge a life for yourself. Yay! And you're proud of it. And you're 33. You have a career as a freelancer in a very niche market, and you have a lot of joy. And you move to another continent where you're building a stable and secure life. There's that word stability again. So good. You've got a stable life and you're secure. Interesting that you moved a whole continent away from your family. And I am proud of you too. 33, like, to have that level of self-development going on. That's fantastic. And it's so normal for us to have a really developed part of ourselves and then a struggling part of ourselves, right? That's really normal. And for it to show up in relationships, I just totally get it. I totally get it. And I think that of course it has a lot to do with the way you were raised. But what can you do now? What you can do now is what you're doing. You're sort of opening up you're lifting the veil on what the heck's happening here. Why am I having this pattern? So terrible relationship patterns, the gift of them is that when they're a pattern and you're old enough to know that, to kind of see, shoot, the same thing keeps happening over and over again. When it just happens one time, you're like, oh, that guy's a jerk. I'll do better next time. It happens twice and you think, oh, I'm just unlucky. 3rd time, you start going, uh-oh, okay, something's up with me, and I can't see it coming, and it keeps happening. And that is a devastating and frightening realization. There's a powerlessness to that, like, I don't even know how this happened. And I hear you. I believe you. You didn't know how this happened. So I'm going to try to see if I can hear in your language here where I see it happening, where I see this sort of little blank outs. I was going to say self-deception, but I don't think it's that active. I think it's just like there's this little like unconsciousness flips in and goes, oh, can't see it. And that's what we do. And you can stop doing that. And we do it by talking about it and talking about it frankly. You feel horrified. You have abandonment issues. Abandonment's such a drag because, you get an attachment issue and it makes you get into a relationship really fast. And you don't ask all the questions you need to ask, which is where I'm going to go with this letter, I'll tell you. But abandonment then makes it so you can't leave even when you already know it's bad. You can't stop loving them even though you know that it's going nowhere. So yeah, that's what happens. And as I understand it, there's a huge brain component. Like, we know that trauma in childhood creates dysregulation. We don't even know the half of it, though, about like everything that goes on. There are changes that go on in the way that we respond. The way that anybody responds to, that like feeling of falling in love or becoming attracted to somebody, like it is so primal. Like nobody has dials on it of how to control that. Nobody does. But you throw trauma in the mix and you're basically, you're like this tender soul at the mercy of all this stuff going on in your wiring that's causing you to attach prematurely and to commit without reason. That's basically what's going on. And I think sometimes knowing, there's a name for what you have. It's complex PTSD. There's a name for what's happening to you, and it's attachment disorders. I don't like the word disorder, but you know what I mean. I can't even diagnose you with CPTSD, but let's just call it childhood PTSD. You have trauma from childhood. It's affecting your relationships. Anybody who thinks they have that, by the way, I have a quiz where you can check against 12 really common symptoms that's happening for you, and it's down in the description section if you want to check that out. It's on the free tools page of my website. That's always linked down there. You can go right to the website, Crappy Childhood Fairy, and go to the free tools page or look at all the other stuff going on. You said, I met this man who was always kind to me and we initiated a courtship that was very casual at first. So I just want to tell you the word courtship has a special meaning, and it's getting to know somebody with an eye toward marriage. And you told me, as you gave me the details on this, there was never an eye towards marriage. It was very clear from some key facts, like being on a different page about whether or not to have kids, like right there, this relationship is doomed. That level of disagreement is too big a thing. You just can't date people like that if what you want is stable, loving relationship with somebody whose values and whose life goals match yours. So here's the harsh thing, and this will scare you as a person with attachment wounds and abandonment wounds, but don't be scared. Take it from me. It sounds scary, but it's the fastest route to that loving, stable relationship you want. But you need to draw the line. You need to get very clear on who could possibly be that right person for you and identify the characteristics of someone who is and someone who is not. There's a line there, and you do not date people below that line. If they don't match things that are important to you, like have to be available for a committed relationship, a marriage even, do not want kids because that's not what you want, really, really loves you and gets you because you're you, and that is the most wonderful thing. That's the person they want to be with. As people have often said in our comments, if a guy likes you, if he loves you, you will not be in doubt about it. You're not going to be in doubt about it. So I'm proud of you that this came to question. But here's what happened is you were already involved with him for quite a while before the conversation came up. And you started developing deeper feelings for him. So you said it was casual. You had a casual courtship with him, but then you developed deeper feelings. I assume it was a sexual relationship. And then it came to a point where you had to confront him, that's kind of a rough word, about where the relationship was going. So I want to put a different model in front of you, where as you're getting to know somebody, you're maybe, no more than the third date, and the first date is coffee, and the second date is coffee and a little, muffin, and the third date might be a lunch, right? You don't want to go too fast. When you've got these wounds, you go very slow. This is what I call structured dating. I teach it in my dating course. You can find that one down below too. Very slow allows you to keep processing what's happening and get real with it, and to have supportive friends who you can check out what you're experiencing with and keep getting a reality check so that you don't slip into that unconscious state that is so common for us when stuff gets stressful. And what's stressful is dating somebody and thinking maybe they're not on the same page. So guess what? You get to find out before you get all into somebody. Now, it's possible to be very disappointed after 3 dates that have, gotten as far as lunch with somebody. I know that can be hurtful. But if you haven't slept with somebody, you have so much more space to think and decide and exit without a lot of pain and activation of your wounds. And that's a good thing. So I really suggest going slowly for somebody with your wounds. You go very slowly. And honestly, people who are serious or good potential partners for you, they will love that about you. It communicates that you're high value. If you've seen that on videos online, I don't really like that, Some people are not low value, but just very desirable is the point. It's very desirable when somebody is, is not rushing in, is not just like ready to open up their entire life to somebody else. That's a red flag for a healthy person. So sometimes we have to act as if. We act as if we don't have these wounds operating, and we just follow the roadmap of somebody who is not wounded like that. We follow the roadmap so that we can get results that are similar. And the thing is, like, when your trauma is most vulnerable is in the early part. Well, I'm not going to say that. There are other things that come up, like childbirth, which is not going to be your choice. And also getting married, or when there's like a threat to the relationship, somebody cheats or something, that can all activate old stuff, a hospitalization. But one really big, rocky, bumpy time is getting into the relationship, because all that, magical thinking is kicking up with all the neurological activity of falling in love. And it's, driving a big narrative, and a whole bunch of like emotional needs are coming up. And if your emotional needs are still just kind of like loose ropes hanging off something, because they never got met, they're going to go, oh, blah, 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 and then wrap around somebody who comes into sight who seems good to you, right? And that can really freak people out. I know. It freaks them out if you are just too into them at first. It doesn't feel right. It feels a bit like off to people. And a red flag appears, and people who have a little bit of like, health around that are just like, oh, I see a red flag. You shouldn't be into it that fast. So slowing down is attractive. Slowing down is wise. And so then you have a chance to know it's not courtship until that is the expressed intention. So people sort of get to know each other. You can get to know people casually. But I don't encourage casual sex. Like, sex is really never casual for somebody with an attachment wound. And it's going to immediately produce, strong feelings and needs around that may not fit the situation. And when you don't know somebody, you're very likely to get hurt. So you can have that differently, even though you're just going to always be living as somebody who had a childhood like you had. When you've had time to get to know somebody and that relationship has formed into something truly loving and committed, then when sex finally happens, it's like, even if you kind of freak out and cry, or, feel like you need to run away, there's going to be a way to talk about it. There's going to be a way to understand. The whole relationship isn't going to end. You would have had a lot of understanding for each other about what might come up, because little versions of it would come up. Like, that's what stable is. That's what stable is. So stability requires slowness. And we're just, we're living in a time where it just seems like it ought to work, that you could rush in, and there's this idea, and there's always commenters. They're like, there's nothing wrong with casual sex. And I'm not really commenting on what everybody wants to do. I'm talking to people with attachment wounds who are writing to me and saying, like, I'm getting my heart broken and I can't see why. And that's what I see. And I pick letters of people I relate to, and I have something to say based on my own experience. Like, sometimes people write and I'm just like, oh gosh, I don't know. I've never had that, or I haven't succeeded at solving that one yet. But this one I have. And that's how I did it. So I thought it was interesting that when you talked to him and wanted to know where it was going, you had to break up because it's weird the way you said it. This resulted in us breaking up because he had recently left another long-term relationship and was not ready for commitment. He was honest and respectful. Okay, but I just think, like, if he was seeing you all this time and presumably having sex and he wasn't ready for commitment, I don't think it was that honest and respectful. I don't think that any person should ever assume that they can just have sex with somebody when they're not available for the whole relationship. Like, I realize, like, two people will totally consent to not talk about that. But why? And it's usually because one of them doesn't want to deal with it because they know it will be a deal breaker, and the other one doesn't want to bring it up because they know it's going to be a deal breaker, and everybody just wants it to kind of hang together. But on some level, that fear you're having, that anxiety you're having, it's because you know. So, all right, I'm going to say this is the hardest thing I'm going to tell you, all right? But when somebody says, oh yeah, I've been seeing you all this time, but actually I don't want a commitment just yet because I just left another long-term relationship. See, people are kind. They try to be kind and they try to make it about that. But what it is that some of us will have a relationship with somebody we really just are not that into. And it's been my experience that most men, they're very capable of that. Like it's funny because my husband and I were talking about a situation like this last night over dinner, and my 19-year-old son, and we were talking about it. And I think it was something that had come up in the comments in YouTube. And, my whole family works on Crappy Childhood Fairy, so we see things, and we were talking about it. And my husband said, oh, I wonder, somebody said, well, how could somebody act so nice and then leave me? And this comes up a lot, right? You'll see it in the letters a lot. And then leave me and not care. And my husband said, I wonder why. And I was like, what do you mean? Still, I was like, how could it be? And he's like, well, he just said basically, like, if women are just offering sex and they're not going to ask any questions or require anything, there's a lot of guys who will be like, okay, all right. Emotionally, they seem a little better equipped to handle that. And so it can work for them. I wouldn't say everybody. I think sometimes men get their heart quite broken by this kind of thing working the other way. So it's not 100%, but you're writing to me, and I think you're having a man-woman dynamic here where, he's just happy to have companionship and sex and yeah, but then he's like, oh yeah, no, I just got out of a heavy relationship. So, you didn't know you were in a doomed relationship. Doomed. I mean, doomed because it can't lead to commitment, and that's what you want. So that is a doomed relationship. Had you had this conversation before you even had, lunch with him, you would have had your answer about him, and you could have saved so much heartache. And this is what I'm going to suggest to you, is that you get very clear about what you need and prepared to speak up for it and walk away when that's not what it is. That's really all there is to it. It's easier said than done, I know. Because what your mind and your attachment wounds are saying, it's like, I better say, I better accept this because it's all I'm ever going to get. And, it took me 4 months before I even met anybody I liked. And what if nobody comes along? They will come along. And they will come along and you'll be emotionally available. You'll be emotionally available because you're not all strung out on somebody who's not into you. And so whether it's after a relationship has ended this way or it's still going on, I just really, for people who want real love, the sooner you can get out of this half-baked BS, the better. Every time you get out of a half-baked relationship, you've just taken a giant step toward true love, even though the thing in front of you that you see is that you're alone on Saturday night. Alone on Saturday night is pregnant with possibilities. So, it's what you need now is friends. I always recommend to people, learn my daily practice techniques. They're free. You can learn them down below. They're on that free tools page of my website. You can learn and try these in less than an hour, and they help to cope with the emotions that come up. Because when you have gotten kind of hooked on somebody and you're having trouble letting it go, it's a lot of emotion, right? It's fear it's not going to be okay. It's resentment at yourself that you screwed up somehow. And so you might know intellectually that you didn't, you did your best, you're good, but it's coming up and it needs to go somewhere. And you can get it out of your head where it's going to spin around if you have CPTSD, out and on paper, get a break from it, and start to have renewed and refreshed thinking and emotional states. New, better, truer, real, present time, right? So that you can make great choices in your life and start to have fun. And you need fun and joy. Without fun and joy, some crappy relationship starts to look like the best offer there is. No. If you're having a bunch of fun with your friends, you're just like, meh, this guy, meh, who needs it? So I'm glad he, was kind and all that. I just really appreciate that you told him, like, if he couldn't give you what you want, commitment, he needed to set you free. So I just thought what was interesting is your passive language, that he sets you free, that he just sits there and like holds you on some sort of, leash or something, and he has to set you free. But, he doesn't have you on a leash. He's just hanging out. He's just being him. He sounds like the sort of person who was capable of being honest about where he's coming from had you asked earlier. So there were good qualities, but it was different. And I would just pat yourself on the back that you dated somebody with good qualities. You got clearer about how much you need to know these certain things in advance. Like, is there a potential for a future? At a certain point in life, I don't know, you're 33, right? You probably had some painful things before, right? You said you have. So if you want to stop having that, you can just start like really owning what you want. You don't have to hide it. You don't have to pretend like
oh, don't worry, I'm not going to get all these expectations on you or anything. No, have expectations. You know, your life is precious. The love and partnership that you have to give is like gold and diamonds. And somebody would be so happy if you would share that with them. So don't waste it. Don't waste it. You just got to kind of start to be a little bit more systematic about this. You're not it? Okay, whoosh. And no staying friends. If you have these attachment wounds, staying friends, it just keeps you kind of enmeshed with people. And it drains away the emotional energy, the emotional availability that healthy people can sense. Your light does not come on when you're all kind of, you know, connected and friends with all these people that you kind of have feelings for. And it's not really great for their potential partners too. You know, for some woman he's going to end up with to be all like, you know, why are we hanging out with your ex? So, you know, we start to act like your great grandparents here, you know, just starting to be like, we date, it didn't work out, it's over, we move on. That's how people used to do it. Okay. There's wisdom in some of that. Not everything they did was brilliant, but that part I think is really good. And they had trauma too, right? They had trauma too. You've been in a downward spiral. I hope this encourages you. You know, just knowing like you're normal, your abandonment wounds are up. There's this thing called abandonment melange. I want to make sure you know about it, that when a relationship ends, even when you know it wasn't great, even when you set the boundary that made the whole thing like not work anymore, good job. But then your abandonment melange kicked in. That's all. And I would suggest to you reading the book by Pete Walker, CPTSD, From Surviving to Thriving. He defined that feeling. I've never heard it spoken of till I read his book, and I was just like, oh my gosh, that feeling. Even when I was like 15, I called it the terrible feeling. I knew the feeling, but it was when something ended or somebody rejected you, me, this feeling of this, it's these three terrible peak level relationships of panic, rage, and grief. And they come together to feel like the world has come to an end, like you have been kicked out of Eden. It's a terrible feeling. And you can reduce that by 50% right away by knowing there's a word for it and it's a thing. It's not actually what's happening. Your feelings are not in response to what's happening. It's just a phenomenon that happens to people who were abandoned as kids. And so the first step toward healing it is naming it, recognizing it when it's happening, and then having your paper and pen to go to get those feelings out, and then having supportive friends who know what abandonment melange is. And that is something, you know, in Crappy Childhood Fairy World, a lot of people know what that is. We talk about it a lot. You can talk to people here in the comments. If you want to go deeper, I have my membership program. People talk on our secret Facebook group. They do the daily practice together on Zoom. So there's so many ways that you can connect with people and get that support so that when you're taking a nosedive down emotionally, it's like, I don't know, I should call them. I just think, what's wrong with me, right? You connect with your friend and she says, nothing's wrong with you. Nothing's wrong with you, Bridget. You're good. You're really good. You're just having abandonment melange. I know it's hard. And when you have somebody who can like mirror that for you, you never have to go down to that terrible level of feeling again. It never has to be so bad as it was before. It gets better. It gets better, and the more days that you spend feeling better, being more like regulated, making better choices, it adds up pretty fast to a very happy life. And if love is what you're seeking, it's bound to find you when you're in that good state, all right? There's a toxic, crazy-making nexus between our culture's insistence that you can sleep with friends, like friends with benefits, no strings attached, and your core desire to have those strings, you know, to have the benefits with somebody who's actually committed to you. Maybe some people can be so-called friends with benefits, but in almost every case, at least one of the friends is lying to themselves and the other person, trying to act cool and twisting themselves into emotional knots to try to hold on to the other person and pretend they're cool. I'm cool. Hey, we're just friends. My letter today is from a woman who is in deep with such a friend, and she's asked for advice, and today I'm going to give it to her. My letter today is from a woman I'll call Amy, and she writes, "Greetings and salutations, Anna. For context, my dad was avoidant plus emotionally and physically unavailable, and my mom was very abusive, psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, and on very rare occasions, physically." All right. I've got my fairy pencil. I'm going to go through and circle things that I want to come back to in a second reading, but let's just read through Amy's letter and see what's going on. All right. She says, living under my mother's roof was my introduction to toxic environments and dysfunctional dynamics before my father introduced me to the first aforementioned term. I had a psychologically and verbally abusive soccer coach as well, who pressured me to carry a lot of weight of the team's success. At school, I was ignored by most of my peers, so much so that talking about me was forbidden in most social circles. My name was taboo over there. And most new people meeting me didn't know I was a sibling of the two most popular kids at school. So for a while, my life was a constant cycle of dysfunction, abuse, and neglect. I couldn't escape it unless I wanted to live on the streets, risk being trafficked, risk drug addiction, my siblings and I being separated, me living in a group home. So I had no choice but to stay in that cycle daily. Right now I have a friend who is currently looking for a new place to live. So I let them crash at my place for the time being. To be honest, it was a friends with benefits relationship based on limerence on both sides. We have been sexually and romantically intimate before going on our first date last week. So we both fell hard and fast. Last week on our date, a movie and a dinner, I called it a date the entire time, but he would stay quiet about that. At dinner, I flat out asked him what he thought that it was, and he replied that we can call it whatever I want. It felt like a non-answer to me. The entire day, I felt that part of him was emotionally unavailable. Not completely, but I felt like there was 30% unavailability. While I was giving this my 100% mentally, emotionally, and physically, because I sensed some unavailability in him, I didn't tell him straight up that I wanted to go on more dates and that I would be ready to be his girlfriend 1 to 2 months from now. As friends, we've both known each other a whole year, and he's been staying at my apartment for a few months. Because there was that unavailability within him, I was too scared to say that I wanted to go on more dates and eventually be his girlfriend if things worked out. And at the time, I wasn't sure if it was worth taking that risk because the happy emotions were high on my end. I didn't want that high to end that night. It would have felt like coming down from an illegal drug high, like a hardcore one, only except my own body would be producing that effect and making me feel pain. A few days after that Tuesday date, he told me he was seeing someone else, someone younger than me, someone who's not even in their 20s yet, but still a legal adult, and that he wants to move forward with her despite the red flag level communication issues he has with her already. Being heartbroken is understatement of what I really felt that night. Ever since he got into that relationship, he has lied to me, hasn't committed to any plans we make to hang out as friends, and I have to do 80% of the work when it comes to communication. But he still lives with me. He doesn't have much of a support network to run to or another place he could stay, so I feel like I can't tell him to get out and kick rocks. I love him very much as a friend, and I want more than anything for him to have a happy and healthy life at all angles. For more context, I'm in my late 20s, and he's in his late 40s. We have an 18-year age gap. I gave him a test and told him that he has 4 to 6 months to work on his communication, honesty, and follow-through with plans. And he can't fail once, or else we're not friends anymore. I gave him the option to tell me if he has a change of plan on his end. I gave him room to say if he's unsure about planning something or committing to a hangout with me. So I give him that flexibility. The stakes are still high, but there is some flexibility there. Half of me doesn't want him in my life anymore. The other half still wants his company, loving words, hugs, and acts of service. He's not all bad. I'm just confused about whether or not he will be a good fit for me as a friend. I'm scared of what might happen if I do tell him to get out one day. I'm finding it hard to make that choice right now. Sincerely, Amy. Okay, Amy. Woo, you got it going on. Okay. I can help. So, Amy, I think you're in a cloud of denial right now. And, what you told me about your childhood, it has a strange edge to it of not being very personal. It's hard for me to explain. Like, you're telling me these facts about your parents. And what I notice is that in your story of your childhood, it's very narrative. It's not very personal. It's not you telling about how you feel or anything. And so I'm not really sure what I'm going to do with that. There's an unusual feeling to what you're saying about your past. But in any case, you told me this really bad stuff happened to you. You were raised in a way that you even had to think about like living on the streets because it was so bad, and you were excluded at school. I think one of the things was you didn't tell me anything about why were you excluded at school. What was that about? And so I just had I immediately, like, my radar went up like, this young woman is not showing me self-awareness right here. And that is what I saw in your letter, that you're talking about stuff in a way that lacks awareness of your role in what's going on and your agency for what happens. But I can help. I can tell you my take on it, but you might want to buckle your seatbelt because I think you're in denial about a couple things. All right. So you said you have a friend who's currently looking for a new place to live. All right. That is a euphemism. He's been living with you for 3 months. And I just know that he's in his late 40s. I know he has the power to arrange that unless he's a highly dysfunctional person. He can go somewhere else. It's very interesting that you've taken on this role of his savior so that he has somewhere to live. And I don't think that's a healthy role for you, this age difference especially. I'm going to really call you out on this idea that you have to take care of this guy and you're afraid of what's going to happen if you have a boundary. And I'm going to talk about things that you told me about the relationship that tell me, girl, you need boundaries here. There need to be some boundaries. Okay, so you let him crash at your place. So crashing at your place means a night, maybe 3 nights, not 3 months. And you tell me after saying he's a friend, actually it's a friends with benefits relationship based on limerence. So even if it was just you who had limerence, he's not a friend. Limerence is immediately canceling a friendship. A friendship is something real. It's something based on mutual giving and mutual acceptance of each other. That's what a friendship is. You don't have any acceptance at all of this guy right now. You have caretaking, but not acceptance. Now, I don't think he belongs in your house. I'm just going to tell you right now. I'm sure you guessed that I was going to go there, but based on limerence on both ends. Well, I'm not hearing that he's limerent about you now. So normally if people were limerent, it would go away immediately, especially if it's reciprocated, especially if people are living together and dealing with all the toilet seat and top of the toothpaste issues, that people get from living in the same space. So then you said we'd been sexually and romantically intimate before going on your first date. Okay, so I just want to call you out. If you're getting romantically intimate with somebody before having a date, you are walking into a fire that's just trouble. With your background, with your attachment wounds, to go on to say that you're romantically intimate with somebody, I believe that you can have sex with somebody without going on a date. But yes, there's a format where people can just sort of hang out and have sex and say that they're friends, and then maybe love develops. That could happen, but I would just say it almost never happens for people who had traumatic childhoods. And we watch Disney and we watch other people and we watch how they do things, but I'm just going to say, like, there's a big reason why in my dating course I teach that you go slowly and you set the bar very high, and you don't date people unless you've already gotten to know them enough to know that they're interested in you, they're emotionally available, they are logistically available, they're not in another relationship, they're not looking for another relationship, they're interested in you and they want to date you, and then you go on a date. This is what happens all the time with kids who were emotionally neglected and not treated well. Is you have a need to have people in your life, like you said, the hugs and, just like saying nice things and the companionship. Like, everybody needs that. Everybody longs for it. I guess there's a few people who don't, but most people do. If they're dating, that's, we're trying to have that in our lives. That's normal and healthy. But when you're trying to get it from somebody who is 20 or 18 years older, crashing on your things, seeing somebody else, I'm just going to tell you, friends with benefits are not your friend. They're not your friend, okay? And friends with benefits who are seeing somebody else are not your friend. And well, we'll get there. We'll get to that part of the letter. I think there's like a big red flag about where you're going with this here, and I want to help you step back from that ledge, all right? And then you say you went on a first date and then fell hard and fast. But you were on this date, this so-called date, and you kept saying, this is a date, this is a date. And he was like, he didn't say anything. He said, call it whatever you want. Girl, it wasn't a date for him. It wasn't a date for him. He was just sort of going along with you. He needs the place to stay, right? He's getting sex. He's like, whatever, call it what you want. If a guy is dating you, he will not deny that it's a date. And what I can imagine is a person gets very shy and can't say it's a date, but all they need to come out of that shyness is if you're saying it's a date. They'd be like, oh, phew, yes, a date. Thank goodness we're on a date. I'm so excited. He doesn't want it to be a date, okay? You gotta let that in. He didn't want it to be a date. That's not where he was coming from. He didn't fall hard and fast. If he had fallen in even soft and slow, he would be happy to call it a date with you. So I'm just telling you the bad news. You've kind of built this up in your mind. This is totally what we do as neglected kids. We get so good at this, at getting our emotional needs met from rocks, basically. And but I don't want you to do that right now because you're looking for love, because you're at an age where it's really important that you not, throw your life away on people who don't care about you. But that's what you have here. And just, I'm just going to tell you, there are many people, and this is common in man-woman dynamics, men will be happy to have free sex if it's free. They will be happy to have it. And what you got to watch out for is your own feelings, your own standards, your own requirements. It's not really the man's job to figure out that you mean something other than what you're saying, which is, you can crash at my house. We're friends with benefits. I'm cool. You can't expect him to be different than what you told him he can be. So you said it was a date. He said it wasn't. And then you said you felt like it was a non-answer when he said you could call it what you want. Yes, it's a non-answer. And that's people who aren't being direct. That's what they do when they don't want to get into the discomfort of hurting your feelings. And for him to tell you, yeah, no, it's not a date, I don't feel that way, would have created conflict, right? He didn't want to deal with it. It probably would have messed up his place to live, and which I don't applaud in him, but there it is. Where he's not writing me the letter, you're writing me the letter. So I'm really talking about you. I'm talking about what decisions you made here versus what you want, and what you can do to start bringing into alignment what you want and what you do. All right. So you said the entire day of that first date, you felt that part of him was emotionally unavailable. You are correct. Good sensing. Not completely, yeah, because you had some sort of friendship there and he could be friendly with you, but you felt like there was 30% not availability and you were giving 100% mentally, emotionally, and physically. So I'm just going to tell you, I encourage you to take my dating course. When you're on a first date with somebody, you don't give them 100%. And I know you had this prior friendship for a year and then you lived together, but not like a couple. It's not a couple moving in together. And so many of us have done this where you're just like, no, we're just living together, and then sex happens. And then some of us who have attachment wounds will try to retrofit the relationship where sex has occurred to fit the attachment we now feel to them. And it's natural to feel attached to people you have sex with. That's natural. If you were not cared for properly as a kid, there's like this oversized attachment thing that attaches really hard. It attaches against all odds. It sees love where there is no love. It sees mutuality where there is not mutuality. And that's what I think is going on with you. Your childhood wounds are running the show here, and they're preventing you from looking at this realistically. And it's putting you in a terrible position because with this guy in your house, you have nowhere to go. You say he has nowhere to go. You have nowhere to go. You are always in his face, and now he's dating somebody else, and you're just kind of like going along here like, oh, that's cool. You said, because I sensed some unavailability in him, I didn't tell him straight up that I wanted to go on more dates and that I would be ready to be his girlfriend in 1 to 2 months from now. I don't know where you got 1 to 2 months. It sounds like you were trying to be his girlfriend right then, or you are now, but so I get that. I get the reticence to sort of say that's what you want, because you could read that wasn't going to land well with him. It wasn't what he wanted. So that was good that you didn't bring it up. Why do that? But you're telling me, you're being honest with us here. That's good. You say as friends you've known each other a year. He's been at your apartment for a few months. But because there was that unavailability in him, I was too scared to say that I wanted to go on more dates and eventually be his girlfriend if things worked out. So I just understand wanting that. But this is a terrible way to get it. And so you didn't want to tell him, but that's what limerent people do. I think you might have some limerence going on here because you can't really have him, where you aren't really telling him where you're coming from because you know that would blow up the bubble. He'd be like, hey, listen, no, that's not how I feel. And it would be clear that you guys have to separate. So I would say you're kind of invested in keeping him around, even though you're saying these weird requirements that you get to later. We'll get to that. Okay. All right. I'll talk about that when I read that. So you weren't sure if it was taking the risk because the happy emotions were high. That's exactly right. And the depression, the abandonment melange that comes when the relationship ends, even if we end it, it's almost unbearable. It's almost, you think to yourself, oh, this is worth putting up with anything, right? Yeah, it would have felt like coming down from a hardcore drug. And there it is. When you experience romance with somebody who's not into you as a hardcore drug, it is an addiction type thing, and it will help you to treat it as such. Okay, so we'll talk about what to do. So then 3 days after that date, he told you he was seeing somebody else. And so it's somebody between 18 and 20, and he's in his late 40s. And you say, and he wants to move forward with her despite the red flag communication issues that he has with her. So I hear you like trying to argue with the reality there, like, but it's not even that great. It's like, yeah, needless to say, he lives with some girl he's sleeping with. And this poor 18 to 20-year-old is going to get involved and be the next victim, just the next person. I think an 18-year-old might be his victim. I don't think you're a victim. I don't think that he's mistreated you. He's going along happily with your boundaryless requirements, which are not really much, right? For a free place to live and some occasional sex. And so, I don't approve of that, but he's not done anything wrong. You've basically handed this to him, and now you're trying to negotiate some emotional payback from him. And you're not going to get it. I can tell right now you're not going to get it. So you were heartbroken when he told you that he's seeing somebody else. I get it. Yeah. You're a traumatized kid, and in your mind, have you ever heard this story? I think I've told it on videos before. When I was 4, my friend Peggy and I were playing in her sandbox, and we had some pots and pans, and we were filling them with sand, and we were pretending to cook. And I was so deep in the imaginary cooking of sand in these pots in her sandbox that I took a spoon and I took a big bite of sand, and I started to try to swallow it, and it was like, ah! And I spit it out, and I was shocked. I'm like, it's sand! My imagination was so strong and wonderful like that. So imagination is good, but as adults, it's time to set aside imagination and be very practical about who we attach with and who we let into our lives and who lives in our houses with us. That's a very big deal. Even for people who are in a committed relationship where they haven't decided to permanently commit, I sort of like go, tricky, especially for trauma people. Okay, because I've done it not a million times, but more times than I can count on my hand. And it didn't work out well, just saying. Okay. So ever since he got into that, you say he's lied to you. He hasn't committed to any plans he made to hang out as friends. So this is my bad news for you. You can't go back to friends. You can't go back to friends. Right now, you're heartbroken. A heartbroken person is not a friend. And the person who broke your heart because they had sex with you, but they didn't want to be with you, but they're living at your house, they're not your friend. You are his meal ticket. You're his place to stay. And of course, this is his feeble attempt to have some boundaries, to have this other relationship. He doesn't want to hang out. You are having to do all this communication. He's lying to you because he doesn't have the courage to be straight with you and to move out like an honorable fellow. That is the honorable thing to do, is to move out and stop, mooching off of you. This is not a good situation. It's toxic. And so what I'm going to suggest to you is you be the brave person and you bring it to an end, and you don't even have to explain. You can just say, all right, clearly this isn't working out. I need you out, tonight. He can get a hotel. All right.
You've done so much for him letting him stay with you. He can go stay with his girlfriend. He can, he will figure it out. It's not your responsibility. And I know that he knows, as somebody in his late 40s, that if you are sleeping with somebody and staying with them and then you start seeing somebody, it's pretty much to be expected you have to leave now. That is so fine for him to do. So I want you to stop worrying about him and take all that focus and put it on you. He's gone. He's going to be out of your life. If you want your life to get better, no friends like this. No friends like this. So you love him very much as a friend. And I think I would say you're in love with him. So I want you to be honest with yourself, or this wouldn't be painful for you. It wouldn't have heartbroken you. You want more than anything for him to have a happy and healthy life. But you know what I want you to want even more than that is for you to have a happy and healthy life. Without these people hanging around, taking up space, you can't get into a relationship with him in your life. Like, that's blocking you. You can't meet somebody. Nobody who's healthy wants to get together with somebody who has this kind of friends with benefits sleeping in the living room or wherever they sleep. Or with all the drama that's going on with him seeing somebody and staying with you and the total unfairness of the whole thing. So he doesn't have much of a support network. That's a red flag, by the way. And he doesn't have anywhere else he can stay. So yes, he does. He does. And so you can tell him to get out. You're not telling him to kick rocks. You're very elegantly telling him, this has become a situation that doesn't work for me anymore, and I need you to move out. Thank you. And you don't need to help him. You don't need to apologize. You don't need to continue contact. But here's where I'm concerned about you. You said, I gave him a test and told him he has 4 to 6 months to work on his communication. So that's not even like a girlfriend. That's like a very angry spouse, and he's not your spouse. And you don't get to make ultimatums about him working on some aspect of himself, on communication and honesty and follow through with plans. And he can't fail even once. You're making an ultimatum on him. So he doesn't want plans with you. That's why he's not making plans. He's not showing up for the plans he made with you because he doesn't mean to make the plans. He's saying yes to placate you so it doesn't rock the boat in this fragile situation you've got. But sweetie, it's over. It's over. It's not happening anymore. And so this thing where your mind is trying to switch it into this other thing, that you have this incredible friendship and you can make demands on him as if you were his wife and he had strayed after many years and he was like not living up. That's not that type of relationship. A friend, that's not how you treat a friend, is full of ultimatums about changing their communication. Like, if you like your friend, hang out with your friend. If you don't like your friend, don't hang out with your friend. But friends we don't sleep with, okay? Very rarely there are friendships that follow a romantic relationship and vice versa, all right? But this is not one of them. This is not one of them. This has gotten very messed up. And so, yeah, he can't fail once or else we're not friends anymore. So I don't know why he's sort of cajoling you. He's going along with this thing, but what I hear here is you trying to salvage some sense that you have control over a situation that feels out of control because it is beyond your control. You can't make him love you. You can't make him stop seeing this other person. You can't make him interested in being your boyfriend. And I know, you wrote to me, you really, and we actually wrote back to you to get you to confirm in writing, you're okay with me reading this and me responding. And you said, yes, that's why I wrote it. So I'm telling you the truth, Amy. Okay, I'm telling you the truth. And I'm hoping now in your late 20s, you can take this in and it will be helpful to you and set you free from a terribly painful situation. I promise you, the pain is never ending in this one. It's just time for him to go, time for you to just wash that man right out of your hair and carry on. There's so many possible wonderful relationships ahead of you when you start having boundaries, when you start having clarity about what you want in a relationship, and you don't date anybody or be friends with benefits. Put that out. Friends with benefits are for people who want a squishy relationship, that has no boundaries. You want something else. I had a hard time being honest about that myself too, at a similar age. I couldn't be honest. I really carried a deep fear that if I had boundaries around who I let into my life, I'd have no one. And I can hear that fear is it's driving you right now. But I promise you, everything gets better when you stop letting in these sponges. emotional, spiritual, material sponges taking from you. And the problem that I encourage you to focus on is not that he shouldn't have done that. He shouldn't have. But whatever. The problem I want you to focus on is that you need a boundary so that doesn't happen anymore. So when the day comes that you move in with somebody you're in love with, they're in love with you, they want to live with you, they want to be your boyfriend, all of that. You guys are on the same page and you can build with that. And even from there, that can be, it's no sure thing, but it's a starting place that I really encourage you to insist on. And so you said, you're giving him an option to tell you if he has a change of plan. You give him room to say if he's unsure about his planning. So it's weird. You're insisting that you're giving him all this flexibility. It's just not for you to give. You don't get to dictate the terms of a friendship like that. That's not how it is. That would be like a husband, a spouse who's in the doghouse. They've done something bad and you're setting terms for him to come back. And this is just you racing into a scenario that's not really happening. And again, I just want to tell you, I know exactly what this is like because I've lived it. I've been on both ends of it. I also was in that kind of a childhood, and I know exactly how the sharp teeth of that loneliness that generates in a person, that it makes you overlook the red flags and overlook the lack of boundaries and just go, basically, I'm going to make this work because I have to. Like, I'm not going to be okay if this doesn't work. And as long as you're doing that, you're not going to be okay. It's just not going to be okay. You can't have your happiness depending on somebody who comes and goes and isn't into you. That's just a bad deal. It's bad math. So when you can learn to be happy single, and you can learn to have friends and a social life and some fun in your life, it puts you in a much better footing to begin to date. I really encourage you to do that. So you said half of you doesn't want him in my life anymore. That's the good half, Amy. Good half is saying, yeah, no, he doesn't belong. The other half wants his company. So try thinking of it this way. You want company, you want loving words, you want hugs and acts of service, but you want it from somebody who loves you back. And when you step away from a relationship where that is withheld from you, where it doesn't exist, nobody's like withholding it, it just isn't there. When you step away from that relationship, you just took a giant step towards real love where you do get to have those things you want. You can't have those things with this guy in your house. It's totally blocking you, okay? So yeah, I know you're scared of what might happen if you do tell him to get out one day. I'm going to guess that what you're scared of is how you're going to feel when the abandonment melange kicks in. And if you haven't heard me explain abandonment melange, it's a term defined by the therapist Pete Walker, who's done great work on the area of complex PTSD. And it's a special, intense combination of fear, rage, and grief that comes up in people who genuinely were abandoned as children. Like there's this weird chemical combination that gets released inside. And it feels like a chemical, like I have it. And when it kicks in, I can kick it in just by even thinking of leaving somebody. It will kick in abandonment melange. I'll start to just feel like poisonous in my body. And then comes the terrible thoughts. Oh, this is terrible. I can't do it. I don't belong in the world. Once you have a name for it, you can say, this is abandonment melange. And immediately it's like turning the light on and realizing there's no monster. You're not being abandoned. You were abandoned emotionally and on many levels by your parents. But right now, you're just setting a boundary so that some sponge isn't living in your house while he has sex with somebody else. Okay? Let's be frank. It's not a very nice situation for you, and your happiness can begin when he's gone. So I wish you well with that. It's become totally normal in this culture to believe that when someone has broken your heart and sucked the life out of you, that if you can just be friends, the emotional chaos will stop and you'll become emotionally available to have a great relationship with some healthy person who comes along. If you're friends with someone, you act like friends. They don't make you feel like you're dying. They don't make you feel like they don't care. They don't make you feel like you have to save them. And they don't pursue impulsive sex with you off and on and then treat you like you're crazy for having feelings. Let's just be friends is a good intention, but almost never possible for healthy people.
And if the relationship has already drained you and driven you to the edge, it's time to ask yourself if you're using the pretense of friendship to cling to a toxic relationship. Why would anybody want to do that? My letter today is from a woman I'll call Lauren, and she writes, "Hi, Anna. What do you do when you close the door on someone but they keep pursuing you? I'm trying to close the door on a toxic hot and cold relationship that's been ongoing for 10 months now." All right, I've got my fairy pencil. I'm going to be circling things I want to come back to, but right now I'm just going to read through Lauren's letter so I can see if I can help. All right. She says, "You've heard it all before, I'm sure. I have CPTSD from my childhood. My father was pretty normal and kind, but my mother is severely autistic and suffered abuse as a child. She was an authoritarian parent, one who criticized heavily, lashed out emotionally, and was unable to regulate her own emotions, much less anyone else's. She also suffered from chronic migraines that made her bedridden for days on end, leaving us children to fend for ourselves while our dad was at work. Yet at times, my mother could also be incredibly warm and loving and present. The entire household operated depending on her health and her moods, and so we vacillated between the two extremes of hot and cold. Trauma bond," says Lauren. "This gave me an anxious, preoccupied attachment style," she says, and that's someone who is fearful of abandonment, basically, which shows up in my romantic relationships again and again. 3 years ago, I joined a soccer team, and I met a guy I'll call Charlie, and immediately fell into limerence. Okay. We were both dating other people at the time. But I fantasized about us being together. A huge factor at play was how physically attractive I found him. Many of my female friends commented on how good looking he was. My brain thought he was out of my league, far too good looking for me. Finally, after some years, I was able to detangle myself from the super codependent relationship I'd been in. Charlie got dumped by the girl he was seeing. As soon as we were both single, he started pursuing me and we hooked up. I had never had a casual hookup before, so I assumed that this was the start of us dating. It wasn't. We hooked up a few times after that, but his behavior was avoidant and unclear. I felt like I was chasing and he was running away. Finally, I asked him point blank what he was looking for, and he said he wasn't looking for a relationship at that time. So I told him we should go back to being friends, and he agreed. And then I suffered, that's right, 10 months of hot and cold behavior. I've read enough about dismissive avoidant attachment to think that we were absolutely in an anxious, preoccupied meets dismissive avoidant relationship. Okay, so she's framing that as attachment styles. It went like this. I would settle into us being just friends, but he would never leave it at just that, always flirting with me and pursuing me. Many times through the summer, we would sit on my front step and talk and drink until 3 a.m. I was so attracted to him, I told myself I would be fine just being friends with benefits. So sometimes I would try to initiate a physical relationship. Once at 3 a.m., I asked him point blank to kiss me, and he told me point blank, that is a bad idea. Okay. So not only would he not date me, he would also not sleep with me, and he wouldn't leave me alone. As soon as I would get sick of it and start to pull away, he would actively pull me back in. I thought him pulling me in was a green light, so I would start to lean in, and then he would pull away. So then I would pull away, and the cycle continued ad nauseum for months. I think we were both at fault for the dynamic. It takes two to tango. I have a deep abandonment wound, so whenever he would pull away or take extra long to reply to a text or flake on plans, I would go into that abandonment melange. That's the super intense abandonment depression that we go into, those of us who were abandoned as kids, and feel like my entire world was ending. Being rejected felt so shameful and made me attack myself. The couple of times he left me on red or didn't show up for plans, it consumed my thoughts and my energy. And I obsessed about it and really tore myself apart for being clingy and embarrassing myself. She puts those in quotes. My response to perceived rejection, him taking too long to text back, or not showing up for coffee was to hit the eject button, like the time that I dramatically returned all his stuff to his house in the middle of the night, or engaged in emotional abuse by threatening to break it off over and over again. I must have had the breakup conversation with him about 6 or 7 times, giving him countless ultimatums and pressuring him to either commit or quit. Sometimes I would go out with other people and watch as it made Charlie jealous. That was when he pursued me the hardest and pursued me the hardest and drunkenly told me he loved me and had sex with me. It was because he had seen me out on a date with another man. I knew at this time that I had earned his love in the shittiest way possible, but it still felt good. His dismissive, avoidant tendencies meant he rarely gave me compliments, didn't treat me or buy me anything, and wouldn't verbalize how he felt about me. But when he was jealous, he did. In December, things changed. He started acting like my boyfriend, buying me food, taking me out on dates, texting me every day, being sweet verbally, spending more nights together. I was scared to ask him what we were in case he rejected me again. And so I decided to just accept the change in his behavior and see where it went. Then he got wasted on New Year's Eve and slept with a stranger. I didn't know about it. Over the next month, he consumed himself with guilt and shame and pulled away from me. We started our toxic cycle of me threatening to leave and him winning me back all over again. Things were bad again, but I didn't know why. In February, I really started to pull away. He started getting blackout drunk every single weekend and sleeping with his ex, which I was also in the dark about. As far as I knew, we were still dating, sort of. He never once gave our relationship a label, no matter how I pressured him. So I wasn't even sure if dating was the word. He told me he wanted desperately to meet and talk about our relationship, and I agreed. He stood me up. Apparently, he was too afraid to face me and admit that he'd been sleeping around. It felt like a slap in my face. I blocked him on everything. This tore him apart, and my friends told me about him showing up to soccer blackout drunk and doing other dramatic attention-grabbing behaviors. After a week of me avoiding him, I ran into him on the street. He looked so shattered that my wall broke down, and I immediately fell into his arms. He was shaking and very emotional. We talked everything out, and it was the greatest conversation ever. He came clean about everything and was so deeply ashamed of himself and his substance abuse and was talking about going to therapy and being better. I didn't forgive him, but I didn't attack him either. I listened and told him that I cared about him, but for my own protection, I would need us to be just friends again. And that I would never, ever let him hurt me like that again. I have never felt so close to anyone in my whole life. Interesting. Okay. We cried and told each other I love you for the first time. I know Charlie loves me deeply. We hadn't meant to hurt each other. It was just our dynamic, but I can also see outside the limerence and know that love isn't ever going to change anything. Our wounds and trauma rub up against each other in exactly the wrong way and send us both spiraling down toxic pathways. I'm currently doing the work on myself to change, but I don't believe Charlie is ready to do the work. Now we're back to being friends. But because of our soccer team, we're always in each other's orbit, and I feel like my vision flickers between reality and fantasy. Sometimes I'm crystal clear about the reality of the situation and know he's a dead end and I don't obsess about him or engage with him. But anytime I'm in a vulnerable place, I want to dip back into that fantasy, and despite my putting up a boundary, he's still pursuing and flirting with me just like he always has, trying to get my attention. And sometimes it works. Sometimes we all go out for drinks and I avoid Charlie for the first hour. But he knows exactly what to say and what to do to pull me back in, and suddenly I'm flirting with him at a party and I feel the cycle starting all over again. I'm not sure whether I need to strengthen myself internally or try to willpower myself to a place of distance and safety, or whether I need to put up practical boundaries like quitting the soccer team or not going out for drinks if he'll be there, or blocking his number. I don't want to do any of those things because I love soccer and all of our mutual friends, and I don't want to pull away from any of that. I also heard from a friend that Charlie is in agony, trying to read my mixed signals right now. Now I'm doing to him what he always did to me, playing hot and cold. I can't imagine what it feels like for him, living in limbo, not knowing whether he has a chance with me or whether that door is closed. Actually, I can imagine, she says. I lived that reality for 10 months. Please help me close the door. Thank you so much for reading. Best, Lauren. Okay, Lauren, I can definitely help on this one. Here we go. All right. So you say, what do you do when you close the door on someone but they keep pursuing you? So Lauren, you've never tried that yet. You have never closed the door on this guy. I'm just going to bust you right here. That door remains open with this pretense that you can just be friends. All right? This is going to be a little bit of tough love because I know it's making you miserable. I know what it's like to be in this type of relationship, and I know it's not going to turn out well. All right? So the longer you keep telling yourself that you have actually set up some kind of meaningful boundary, but he just keeps doing this thing, the longer you're going to be unhappy and unavailable for an actual relationship. So let's go through. I'll show you what I saw here. So in your childhood, your mother was severely autistic and suffered abuse as a child, and she was authoritarian, and she had chronic migraines, bedridden. You've had to fend for yourself. She'd be loving and present, and then her mood would get terrible. And there it is. There's where you got stamped with your trauma bond flavor. And the worst thing, our trauma as kids can turn into something that draws us in as adults to the point that I would say that the game of cat and mouse is actually erotic for you, all right? This thing where somebody draws you in, rejects you, draws you in, gives you a heightened emotional experience every time they take you back, that it's addictive. It's just addictive, and I know, and so many people who write to me have this. It's not your fault. It's not your fault you have this, but it's a terrible way to live your life. It's just as miserable as if you had a problem with alcohol or drugs, all right? So let's go through here. So it was 3 years ago, you joined a team, you met the guy, and immediately fell into limerence. So you had a fantasy. You were both dating other people at the time, so I guess you weren't that into the guy you were with, but you fantasized about being together. And it's a lot because he was good looking. Okay, this is a lot where my theory that it's an eroticization is. He just looks really good. He's really mean. He gives you that feeling that he doesn't want you, and then he takes you back in and, this is what your mom did. This is what your mom did to you. And I know what it's like. I had an alcoholic mom, and so she would be just like totally unavailable. And then on some days she'd feel guilty, or she was temporarily sober or whatever, and she would just like give it all. And it was like so delicious, to be taken back in like that. I know. And I've had my experience with relationships like this, where it is just so exciting when they take you back and there's a little bit of hope. It's never full hope. It's never just like flat out actual hope. It's like a little bit of hope and they take it away, and a little bit of hope and they take it away. Okay, and then you did something interesting and turned the tables later, but I'll get to that. So you got out of the super codependent relationship you'd been in. Okay, so you've self-diagnosed as codependent, in the past at least, and he got dumped. Well, that's for, interesting. I mean, somebody's got to get dumped in a relationship that ends, right? But now we know, now we have an inkling of why, right? As soon as we were both single, he started pursuing me and we hooked up. All right, so I'm just going to sort of keep focusing on language where you keep sort of putting the ball in. He pursued you. So you hooked up. So you'd never had a casual hookup before, so you assumed that it was the start of dating, and it wasn't. You hooked up a few more times after that, but his behavior was avoidant and unclear. All right, let's talk about that. And you said, I felt like I was chasing and he was running away. Finally, I asked him point blank what he was looking for, and he said he wasn't looking for a relationship at that time. So I told him we should go back to being friends, and he agreed. All right, so just like crappy childhood fairy rule number 1 for people with attachment wounds like you, I'm sorry to tell you this, you can't go back to just being friends. When you have a torrid, limerent trauma bond with somebody, there is no friendship there. All right. A friend is not somebody who treats you like that, who leaves you confused, feeling jerked around, neglected, abandoned. That's not what a friend is. It's a construct that you're making. I'm just kind of going to name it here. You're making this pretense that by not sleeping with him, you can have a relationship. But be honest. You know you're hoping he's going to come around. And that's just not a friendship. And so any relationship between exes where there's any kind of energy on either side, that hoping for sex, hoping they're going to come around, hoping it's really going to work out because it's true love, that is going to doom your emotional availability. And because he's demonstrated such a lack of consistency and sincerity towards you already, as much as you kind of like lift him, elevate what he's doing into something a little better than I see it, yeah, he doesn't treat you well. He's not your friend and he's not your boyfriend. So what is he here? So you had hot and cold behavior. You said you've read enough about dismissive avoidant attachment that you think you were in an anxious preoccupied, that would be you, fearful of abandonment, chasing, meets dismissive avoidant. Yeah, that might be true, but you say relationship, but you guys have a small R relationship. So it's not uncommon that somebody who's anxious and clingy is chasing after somebody who's just, very aloof and cold. That's not uncommon, but it's not happy. And what I understand about it is, unless two people are going to meet in the middle on it, where the avoidant person has some latitude, but the fearful, anxious person has some commitment they can count on. No, it's just miserable. It's just miserable. And I know you are, so you wouldn't be writing. Okay. So you said it goes like this. I would settle into us just being friends, but he would never leave it at just that. So if you would be friends, he would start to flirt again. So a little bit, Lauren, didn't you notice how you actually had a lever in this whole thing? That if you said, I'm not going to sleep with you anymore, I just want to be friends, he would start to flirt with you. He would get jealous about everything else you did. He would start to move toward you, which is what you always wanted. But here's the thing. If you have to jerk somebody around and hurt them to make them want you, it's never going to be, it's just not love. It's not love. It's a trauma thing. It's a form of kink, really. I get letters about this not infrequently, where one person is, in love with the other one, and the other one is only there if they're pulling away, and then they're gone, and comes back if they're pulling away. That's the feeling the other person likes. It's like the little cat toy is getting pulled away. It's getting pulled away, and so they run and they grab it. But they don't actually want it. They don't actually want the toy. They don't actually want a relationship. They like the feeling of pursuit. They like the feeling of, I'm going to get abandoned, and then pursuing. So a little bit, when you start talking, well, okay, I'm going to talk about this because I see that you kind of learned how this goes on your side, and you can assess for yourself. Okay. So many times through the summer, you'd sit on the front step and talk and drink until 3 a.m. I was so attracted to him, I told myself I'd be fine just being friends with benefits. Did you tell yourself that? Well, when you're in love with somebody, you're not going to be fine with being friends with benefits. I think you got that. You were friends with benefits. What sort of kept messing up the relationship is it wouldn't turn into more than that, right? So sometimes you would try to initiate something. You asked him to kiss you and he said it's a bad idea. So there's one moment where he was showing some better judgment. It was a bad idea. Do you know why? This is the painful part. Because he wasn't into you in that way. So some people are perfectly happy to have friends with benefit sex, but they're not into you. And he had known you well enough at that point that, I know it's painful, right? But I know this is what it is, but you're just trying to, like the anxious avoidant thing, you're like, maybe there's a psychological explanation. Maybe it's just a trauma injury, but he's just not that into you. And he also sounds like a whole basket of problems as you sort of get into what ended up happening. So even if he were into you, not a great match here. So not only would he not date you, but he also wouldn't sleep with you, and he wouldn't leave you alone. So yeah, won't date, won't sleep with. He actually didn't want to be romantic with you. So he did, he was willing to do that to stay friends. But you couldn't, that we can't help who we fall in love with. We can't help who we're attracted to. So at least you were honest. You were just coming from where you were. But the part where you got dishonest is where you promised that you guys could just be friends or just friends with benefits, or that you would stay friends, and you were really firm about that. That was an experiment, I would say. You were experimenting to see how that felt for you and how he reacted to it. But there's only ever been one thing you wanted out of this. You wanted to be with him for real. There's no shame in that, but it's not to be, okay? So you say you're both at fault for the dynamic, for sure. You have a deep abandonment wound, And so every time he would take a long time to reply to a text or flake or, you would go into abandonment melange. It's horrible, isn't it? And I know what that's like so abandonment melange, it's this phenomenon, Pete Walker named it, for somebody who was abandoned as a kid. When there's something that triggers that old wound, this intense toxic cocktail of grief, rage, panic comes up, and it feels like the end of the world. And that's literally the words you used. The world was ending. Those are the words you used. And then being rejected feels shameful, and made you attack yourself. I totally understand. So he would do that. He'd leave you on red, and it would consume your thoughts. So that's what obsession is like. That's what relationship addiction is like. It just absolutely consumes you. It stops you in your tracks. And, just gently, I want to invite you, when we finish this letter, to just do some reflection on, what has it cost you to have all that life force of yours go into something that just is a drain? It never pans out into the relationship you want. You've tried every permutation of how you can accept how it is, make do with it, date somebody else, but it's not flying, is it? That's the nature of love, and it's sad but real that, there comes a time when you actually do have to close the door. And you said you wanted to do that. Oh yeah. You tore yourself apart for being clingy. You felt that you embarrassed yourself. So a lot of shame in being neglected. Totally normal. It's actually not shameful. It's okay. You say you engaged in emotional abuse by threatening to break it off over and over again. And, I do call people out on that sometimes. If you're actually in a committed relationship and you keep threatening them that you're going to leave, but you don't mean it, that is emotional abuse. But I think when somebody's just having hookups with you and sleeping with other people and lying, that you threatening to leave, I wouldn't call it emotional abuse. I just call it like an attempt to set a boundary that you weren't totally able to hold. Okay, you weren't able to honor it because your love for him was so great, your need for him was so great, you would abandon yourself. That's what it is. I'm not getting the feeling that was emotional abuse. So you had that breakup conversation with him 6 or 7 times. You gave him ultimatums, pressuring him to commit or quit. And then you loved watching him get jealous, and that's when he would pursue you the hardest. And then he drunkenly told you he loved you and had sex with you. And yeah, because he saw you out on a date. I think he's a very hurt and messed up person, very wounded. And a lot of this stuff is just coming out of pure unhealed wounds. And then it goes on all this blackout drinking and drunken behavior and just total abandonment of you and lying. And I think maybe when you hear me read this out loud, you're just going to go, oh, wow, he's not actually what I thought. He is, I think, using you for friendship and security in the measure that he wants in the given moment, considering what else is going on in his life. But a little bit like we do, you're psychologizing it. And you say his dismissive avoidant tendencies meant he rarely gave me compliments, didn't treat me or buy me anything, and wouldn't verbalize how he felt about me. But he was jealous. When he was jealous, he did. Okay, so you say dismissive avoidant, I say dishonest. If he loved you, he would verbalize his feelings. He would buy you things. He would just do the normal couple things if he loved you and was worried that you were going to leave. I don't think he was that worried. I think the jealousy activates a reflex in him that, it's very convenient for him that you're emotionally and sexually available if he just pursues you, right? I know, it's hard to hear. Sometimes people go, gosh, Anna, you don't have to be so mean. But I don't want to be mean. It's out of I know I've been through this, and I just want to tell you the truth so that you can really shut the door, so that you can abandon hope, because it's the false hope that, he's going to change. So this is where your childhood trauma really kicks in when it got dire. So when you started to really pull away, he started getting blackout drunk every single weekend. He started sleeping with his ex, didn't tell you. and you thought you were still sort of dating. If you're still sort of dating somebody, and I don't know, don't sort of date anybody. Date them. Date them and see if they're the one for you. I know you don't want to be in this sort of entanglement. He never once gave the relationship a label, no matter how you pressured him. So I wasn't even sure if you were dating. I don't think so. If someone's dating you, they can call it dating. If there's resistance to labeling it, they are not. It's just not that. It's, I don't know. You could interpret the word dating any way you want, but the way that you're talking about, no, he's not doing that. He told me he wanted desperately to meet and talk about the relationship. You agreed, and he stood you up. So there you have it. You say apparently he was too afraid to face you and admit that he'd been sleeping around. You say apparently. I'm not sure that's what it was. I just think it was just purely shitty treatment of somebody who doesn't really care about your feelings and is sleeping around and maybe thought for a minute they should talk to you, or maybe I'm just challenging you, Lauren. Why on earth would you want to have another day of this? You deserve so much better. All right. So you blocked him, you tore him apart, and friends told you that he would show up at soccer blackout drunk and do dramatic things. But see, this is weird. This is where the little cat who chases the toy got activated in you. It's like, really? He got that sad about me? I know. So it was like, okay, something real happened, something emotional happened and registered that you weren't just completely nothing to him. And I get it. All right. So after a week of you avoiding him, you ran into him on the street and you say, he looked so shattered that my wall broke down and I immediately fell into his arms. Okay, there's your old codependent thing. The guy looks shattered. And so, oh, I love him. A guy who's cheated and abandoned and lied and all that stuff, just because he's shattered and gets blackout drunk all the time, that the codependent thing in you that got formed when you were a little kid with your mom's like off-on behavior, it's that magical thinking that it's like, he's shattered because his heart has finally cracked open. And I totally see why you thought that, because he came clean about all his terrible behavior and cheating and substance abuse. And you say, I didn't forgive him, but I didn't attack him either. Okay. And I listened and told him I cared about him, but for my own protection, I'd need us to just be friends again. Okay, there's your fatal mistake. He's not your friend, and he's not capable of being your friend. He's a person who hurts you every time you get involved with him, and your life force drains out. A friend is somebody who builds you up. A friend is somebody where as a result of spending time with them, you become a better person. They get you. They care about things that are hurtful to you. They've got your back. So this is not your friend. So really, like, sometimes when we say that, we're going to have to just be friends. We're hoping we could turn the dial down on the intensity, but still keep the romantic possibilities intact, like a bookmark, right? And it totally makes sense. And there are cases in human history where it's worked. But even if he were madly in love with you, the stuff going on in his life right here, even if he were begging you to be with him and it was all he ever wanted, what's going on in his life right here means he really can't do it. Certainly not now. And if somebody has problems of this magnitude, I would say wait 10 years to even entertain the possibility, to see if they've had a huge change. These are serious problems and he's not working on them. And so you said you would never, ever let him hurt you like that again. So that sounds really good, right? You don't have the power. When it gets this bad, we become powerless to not get hurt again, to not get entangled again. So big steps are required. You say he loves you deeply, and in his weird, mean way, yes, maybe, you hadn't meant to hurt each other. No, he was just kind of selfishly pursuing what he wanted. It was just our dynamic. Yeah, you can see that love isn't ever going to change anything, and your wounds and trauma rub up against each other in exactly the wrong way and send you both spiraling down toxic pathways. I'm not aware, there's nothing in your letter that tells me that you're the one sending him on a toxic pathway. He's on a toxic pathway, and you're codependently yoked to him. Kind of, you've hitched your wagon to his star, and his star is just going into the black hole. So, what can you do? My metaphor sort of leads you there. It's time to unhitch. You say, I'm currently doing the work on myself to change. I challenge you. I don't think you are yet. I think you're looking for the easier, softer way, as they say in 12-step literature. but you don't believe he's ready to do the work. No, when you'll know that he's ready to do the work when he's done the work and he comes to you and he's like, all he ever does is the work, and he's like sober, he is single, he is honest, he's full of structured, positive, contrite conversations to have with you. But I don't think that's going to happen. And I wouldn't settle for anything less. And even then, a lot of times somebody will get sober and want to make some changes. And then in the first few months, 6 months, 1 year, they want to get together again with somebody who they had that connection with. And the connection itself, because it's inherently rocky because of all you've been through, will be very destabilizing for them and actually dangerous for them. And honestly, if you love this guy, set him free to go work on himself if he does. I mean, he's either going to self-destruct or he's going to work on himself. But the last thing he needs is any codependent energy about, if he would just get his life together, the thing between you would be happy. Like, I really, having been through this before, having my brother and 2 partners die of drugs, and the partners, while they were my partner, I'm just speaking from experience. The right thing to do is to detach and let them do their best. Being in a dramatic relationship is the worst thing for them, okay? It's dangerous. Now, time to focus on you, because you have been in danger yourself. Your life, your future, all your happiness, you're in danger. I don't think it's immediately life-threatening to you, but it's bad. And so detachment's going to get you back out of that. You say that you're always in each other's orbit because of the soccer, and sometimes you're clear about the reality, and then sometimes you flicker back into fantasy. Yeah, it works that way. And it'll work that way so long as you have contact with him, honey. It's a tough road. So breaking contact, getting support from women who understand or maybe are walking the same path with you. You could go to Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous. You could go to ACA, Adult Children of Alcoholics and Other Dysfunctional Families. This type of relationship thing. You could come into my dating program or dating coaching with me or my team. This is what we work on. We help people come back to reality, and we do that with practical tools that help keep taking you out of the fantasy and back into the delicious truth of reality. It's actually quite good and comforting. Do you ever get that where you're just like, oh yeah, I'm just pursuing a ghost here. That feels good. It's a good feeling. And to be surrounded by people who support you and they're like, yay, good job. Good job, Lauren. You did it. You stand up for yourself and you go, guess what? I bought myself a new dresser today and I put it together myself. And everybody's like, yay, yay. And you help each other, put your furniture together, and you go out to outings on the weekend together, and you start to have a life that's only based on friendship and positive growth and none of this destructive emotional vampirism that's been going on with you and this guy. You say that sometimes you go out for drinks. He's got this blackout drink thing and he says he loves you, and sometimes you go out for drinks and then you ignore him for an hour. Now you're playing with him, all right? You know that that's what sets him off. And then you go back and you get sucked back together through drinks and ignoring each other. And I just want to say, I suggest to you, even if you don't have a problem with alcohol, while you're healing this problem, I would suggest don't drink alcohol. Don't do mind-altering stuff. Somebody said this to me when I was struggling, and they just said, you have no business drinking alcohol. And I was like, what? But I'm not an alcoholic. But it's true. It's really hard to stay with your better judgment. It's hard to eat the food that you know is good for you. It's hard to keep the bedtime you know is good for you. It's hard to keep the boundaries you know are good for you. And it's hard to stay out of beds where you don't belong when there's alcohol involved. And since he, I don't know if you know this, but alcoholism, which he appears to have, and it's taking him down a mental health bad rabbit hole, can be fatal. And so I just urge you, don't participate in that with him. Anyway, I'm really sorry about the soccer team, but yes, I would leave the soccer team. And I know that's not fair, but you recovering and getting your life together is more important than this group of friends and this thing you enjoy. And I just know you can find another team, another activity, another group of friends if that's necessary. Be willing to go to any lengths, because I'm telling you, what you have now is a full-fledged addiction that's taking you down. So take it seriously. Okay, that's my suggestion to you, Lauren. The last thing you told me is that your friends say he's in agony trying to read your mixed signals. Stop playing the game. Don't give him signals. No contact. Yes, block. no contact, and you're going to still think about him. Stuff is going to remind you of him, and you put it out of your mind. There's there's a lot of tools. Like I teach my daily practice, and that's one way you can be processing these feelings. Maybe you're in therapy or you're thinking of doing that. Everything you can do to stay on the path. Don't go down your bad rabbit hole of like, maybe if I could just have contact with him. The way an addict just thinks, just this one time, I want to do the drug again. That's my suggestion to you. And you said, please help me close the door. And that's what I'm saying. Actually do it. No more contact. No more contact with this source of toxic miserableness for you, Miss Lauren. You're going on to good places, all right?